Hello, welcome back. I'm so incredibly stoked to introduce you all to the very first guest of the pod. She is a woman in STEM, a TikTok influencer, and nuclear energy extraordinaire. Her name is Kylee Cunningham, also known as Miss Nuclear Energy on social media, and she is currently pursuing her PhD in nuclear engineering at MIT while also informing the masses on what nuclear actually is. I think today's episode is so important for us to really listen to because, as we all know, we are facing a climate crisis, and energy is a huge factor in this. At this moment, the US derives only 18.1% of its energy from nuclear power plants, while fossil fuels make up over 60% of the power grid. If we want to see substantial changes in the health of our environment, the US and the rest of the world need to make substantial changes in how it operates. And a great starting point is with its energy consumption and sources. So I hope you all listen to this episode with an open mind and are able to leave this interview with a new perspective of nuclear energy. And with that, let's get started. Well, first off, thank you again. So excited that you're here to chit chat about anything and everything nuclear energy. Like myself, I think a lot of the people that are tuning into this episode aren't necessarily well versed in what nuclear energy is, what the pros and cons of it are, what the risks are, and what the benefits are. So really excited to get your perspective of them. So first question is, what part of nuclear energy are you most interested in or want to work in? Because I feel like there's so many different facets of it.
Oh my gosh. And that's the thing. Most people think of nuclear energy and they think like Homer Simpson, like just pushing buttons at a nuclear power plant kind of
do it for her
thing. But the reality is, the reality is there's so many different things you can do in the nuclear field. You can work in medicine. You can be a health physicist. You can study like how different types of radiation affect different cancers. You can be the person who's saying to doctors, hey, this person's had too much radiation, too many x-rays, let's scale it back. There's so many different things to get involved with in the medical field. Beyond that, there's nuclear fission, there's advanced reactors, there's nuclear fusion. It's just so diverse. But specifically what I'm interested in and what my research is focused on is on the material science side of nuclear. So right now, I'm working on a project with Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They're funding MIT to do some research to basically figure out what materials are going to be the strongest and the best for building a fusion reactor. Because in nuclear fusion, the crazy thing is you have these little neutrons, right? These little subatomic particles that are bouncing around, and they have so much more energy than we're used to with fission. So trying to understand how all that energy like impacts different materials is what my research is focused on.
That's insane. What got you into that specific section of it as well? Because like you said, there is so much of it. What drew you to that area?
I did actually going back to when I was in high school. So I had like the best engineering teacher of all time. Shout out to Miss Nimi. Like I owe my entire life to that woman, another woman in STEM. We love it.
Love it.
Great role model to look up to, but she encouraged me to participate in this competition in Florida. It's called the Astronaut Challenge. So we used to go to Kennedy Space Center and pretend to fly a space simulator and do all this cool stuff. But one of the parts of the competition was to come up with a sort of research experiment proposal, and then write out that proposal and defend it. It's honestly, it's kind of just the qualifying exam process for a PhD, just scaled down, which I did not know at the time. I don't know why I would willingly put myself through that, but I did. And
Twice.
twice, right? And so the competition, that like experiment proposal, we were given a prompt, and the first prompt was to figure out something to do with NASA's asteroid redirect mission. And my team, the seniors on my team, decided we're going to do something with radiation shielding. We're going to figure out a material to protect astronauts from radiation if they want to go out physically on an asteroid. And this was my first exposure to nuclear. I thought it was the coolest, craziest thing, and it totally blew my mind. So I was like, yep, I'm in. Nuclear materials, we're going to do that. And then going into my freshman year of undergrad, I ended up getting an internship at Oak Ridge National Laboratory the summer after. And right, thank you. So crazy so early on, but the reality is most people don't know, if you're an undergrad, the opportunities are out there. Like, nobody's applying for internships when you're a freshman, so just fill out the application and you'll probably get the job because nobody else is applying.
That's a really good hack. Love that.
Yeah, so I filled out the application, and that job was working in computational nuclear materials research. And I didn't know anything about nuclear. I didn't know anything about materials, but I knew I was good at computer science. So I said, I bet I can do this. And I took the job and I fell in love with it.
One, props to you for like being confident to do it, even though it was like something outside of your comfort zone. I feel like a lot of people, especially women, tend to not go for things unless they're like 100% certain that they can do it. That is a big thing with applying to different jobs. So that's awesome that even as like a freshman in undergrad, you did that. And that kind of leads me to like an additional part is for your experience being in undergrad and now in graduate school in this these programs. Like, what is the state of the nuclear energy programs in school? Is it well funded? Are there lots of opportunities? Are people excited about it?
Yeah, so it's been kind of crazy over the last, I feel like I'm so old. I just finished undergrad last year, so I'm only 1 year into my PhD. But it's kind of funny to have watched the industry grow over the last few years. Right now, most programs are in dire need of more students, right? Like it's at the point where not as many people are applying. It's kind of like nuclear is like the best kept secret right now, and I think people are gatekeeping it, and we need to stop that. But the programs are actually incredibly well funded right now because of the Department of Energy's push toward reaching and achieving certain carbon emission goals and climate change goals. So the Department of Energy has this program. It's called the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, ARDP. And this program essentially is giving several $1 million to a few different companies to develop an advanced nuclear reactor, a new type of nuclear reactor. And all of those companies that are like, oh my gosh, now we have all this money, what do we do with it, are sending that money to university programs to develop what they call a subcontract. So the university will do research kind of with them and on their behalf. So that puts money into these nuclear programs. And honestly, one of the biggest problems we are seeing and starting to very seriously recognize in the industry is our workforce development problem. There are way more jobs than we have people to fill. More and more people are retiring each year. And because of that, we don't have enough young people coming in to fill all the new jobs from all these new nuclear reactors. But we also don't have people to fill the jobs of people that are retiring. So there's this massive gap right now. It is like the move to go into nuclear right now.
In this economy, for sure. Truly.
Oh, yeah.
So with this shortage of talent and people going into these programs, is there anything that either the companies or schools doing to entice younger people to get into this field outside of just funding the programs?
I think the nuclear industry has a tough time with this one. Me personally, I'm making TikTok videos.
Yes.
But I think there are a lot of initiatives to provide funding. There are a lot of scholarship programs through the American Nuclear Society. And the American Nuclear Society is like trying to brainstorm different things that they can be doing. But right now they're struggling. There's not a ton besides pouring funding into programs that's going on right now, recruitment wise.
Totally. To touch back into what you said, like you're making TikToks. What was the inspiration for that? Is that just to clear up any misconceptions that you've seen just the general public have? Is it to get people into nuclear energy? Is it all of the above? Like what got you into it? Why do you keep posting?
Yeah, okay. So this is kind of a fun story. My first video ever, I posted 2 years ago in August. We're coming up on the anniversary.
Oh my God,
should do something to
congrats.
celebrate, right?
Really, yeah.
But thanks. So 2 years ago, I went on a short-term study abroad to Iceland, right? So I went for a week. It was like a crash course that I got this scholarship to pay for, which was super cool, but it was kind of a crash course on geothermal energy. And a lot of the discussions that we were having in these seminars were about ways that Iceland is looking to supplement their geothermal energy to kind of meet the rising electricity demands in their country. Mm-hmm. And being the only token nuclear engineer on the trip, I of course had to raise my hand and say, what about nuclear? And the response I got was so insane. The lady who was giving the talk, the woman said, quote, "Oh no, we don't do that. We're a peaceful nation. We don't believe in that." And I said, no, not what, like peaceful energy use. And she just said, nope, we don't believe in that, and changed the subject. And I was kind of frustrated and surprised at the response. So this was 2021. I had just gotten TikTok like right after, like still towards the end of the pandemic kind of thing. And I was like, you know what, this is it. I'm making a video. And I did, and it did very, very well, unexpectedly well. So I just kept doing it. And now like my main goal, what I love to do is respond to messages and comments from different people, answer their questions. And I think the most rewarding thing, and the reason I keep doing it, is because I keep getting DMs from high school students asking about how to go into nuclear and like how to study it, especially high school females that are like, I've never done STEM. I don't know. I'm like, no. Let's get on a Zoom call like right now. Drop what you're doing and we're going to have a conversation. And I'm fortunate enough I get to do that like once a week with new high school students. And it is just like the best thing. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's like, I mean, what? So 2 years, 52 weeks times 2, 104. Like on average, 104 students are now getting into nuclear energy. That is crazy. And that's like a notable difference that you're making just through TikTok, which is even more insane. That's so exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is. It's so rewarding. And I mentioned my engineering teacher before. I was fortunate enough to have female role models to look up to when I was planning out my career path kind of thing and just diving into this world. So I'm just trying to pass the torch.
That's awesome. I feel like something that's really exciting too is that you fill in a niche that not very many people have ever seen. It's kind of like Hank Green type of content, but just like you go much more in depth. Awesome. A big thing is that you are kind of a science communicator for nuclear energy, which I think is really important because there are so many misconceptions to what it is. Typically people think nuclear, you think of bombs, especially with all of the popularized media that is out right now. So if you were to be asked what the pros and cons of nuclear energy are, how do you explain that to just your average person?
Yeah, we'll start with the negatives to rip the Band-Aid off. You know, the cons, I think right now, the biggest cons are the cost of construction. So what a lot of people don't know is nuclear power plants actually can be very profitable, but in a much longer time span. You know, it's the startup costs that are always so expensive. And then when construction gets delayed, like we saw Plant Vogel was just unit 3, I believe, just came online like a few weeks ago in Georgia, brand new, the first new nuclear reactor we've built in several years.
That's
so
awesome.
very exciting, but it should have opened like 5 or 6 years ago. And part of the reason is when we're building the first of a kind nuclear reactor, nobody's ever commercialized or built this kind of nuclear reactor before. Then you start to run into issues that you didn't foresee or didn't know, didn't expect, and that causes delays. And then, of course, we had the pandemic, which slowed things down drastically. And that drives up costs. You have interest on loans that you took out to pay for the reactor, and it just, the long-term cost is the problem. But the solution to that is what the industry is pushing for, and so many people are working on deploying right now. So they're called small modular reactors. So it takes the nuclear reactor technology we have right now, right? And it takes that technology and like shrinks it down to a smaller size. So these reactors can be manufactured and mass produced instead of custom making every single individual part, which takes a long time to do, drives up costs. Now we can pump out parts super, super quickly, build the reactors faster, and hopefully have clean energy faster. So that's kind of the biggest con, but flipped to a pro that we're working towards fixing in the industry. But I think one of the other things, you know, if we're talking about pros, it's carbon-free energy, right? A lot of people get concerned about like the risks and the potential for like Chernobyl or Fukushima, any of those big scary accidents. And a lot of people will bring up 3 Mile Island too, which was a meltdown that happened, a partial meltdown that happened in the United States. But what I always like to point to is that 3 Mile Island demonstrates that the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, their standards are so strict that their systems work. So when we have an accident, we don't have crazy meltdowns like the Fukushima or Chernobyl accidents, right? Fukushima, poor Japan, there wasn't that much they could actually do about the reactor because of the earthquake and then the tsunami that hit. Actually, what happened is the diesel powered generators that run the pumps to keep cool water flowing through the reactor to keep it from, you know, doing fission and getting all excited and heating up, right? So the pumps that keep that water circulating, they had no electricity to run, and their backup diesel powered generators that were supposed to run them were in the basement and flooded. So they had no way to power these pumps. So we've learned from that. And one of the things that are being implemented in these new like small modular reactors and advanced reactors are what we call passive safety systems, which means we're using, it doesn't mean we're working less hard to be safe, right? We're actually using and relying on things that are impossible to fail, like gravity and what we call convection currents. Like when you boil a pot of water, you see the cold water kind of sinks to the bottom and the hot water rises and it starts bubbling, right? So we rely on things like that with the cold water sinking and the hot water rising to design systems that will never fail because gravity doesn't fail. They only run on convection currents. So relying on those kinds of things is one way we're mitigating the potential for an accident like Fukushima again. And Chernobyl, I mean, nuclear reactors have these things they call containment buildings over them in the United States and all over the world now. But Chernobyl did not have this containment building, right? So because it didn't have this giant concrete structure around the nuclear reactor to catch any radiation if there ever was an accident, there was nothing there to catch the radiation, and there was an accident, and then it happened, right? In the US, we don't play that game. We have containment systems. We have 3 levels of containment for every nuclear reactor, not just one, not just 2, but 3 levels. It's really crazy, but they are so insanely safe. And of course, it's carbon-free energy, right?
Yeah. Every time that I bring up nuclear energy or even think about it or see it online, safety is always the primary concern, which is
Yeah.
totally makes sense. But I think that oftentimes, from my perspective, it tends to be inflated because if you look at coal or oil, there have been numerous instances of safety hazards from operating with that type of technology and that type of energy. And so, like, everything nuclear is going to have risks.
Yeah.
But like you said, I feel like they are so well mitigated because of all of the regulation that you've pointed out, that it seems like a really good way to go forward, especially when we're looking at the intersection of sustainability. From my perspective, it seems like nuclear energy is the path forward to a more sustainable future. And when it comes to the public perception, are you seeing anything either on TikTok or at school through academia? What does the public perception look like from your point of view?
Yeah, I have learned quite a bit from being on TikTok what the public perception looks like. I think in academia and in the industry, a lot of times we forget that people don't know what we're talking about because we're so like, the nuclear industry is such a tight knit industry and everybody is so close, which is one of the things I love about it. But because we are so tight knit, it is very difficult for us to kind of branch out and interact with or work with people who don't understand the nuclear side of things. And because of that, we get kind of pigeonholed. So when we're communicating or talking about nuclear energy, we have a tendency to overcomplicate the technical information. And I really think the general public overall is starting to lean more and more towards nuclear just because of the clear evidence we are seeing. I mean, I'm in Boston, I'm at MIT. I didn't see snow this year in Boston, no snow.
Yeah.
That's like
insane.
not cool. So we're very clearly seeing the impacts of climate change. And I think more and more people are starting to become aware of it and become concerned. And while we're also in this kind of digital age and pushing more and more towards virtual reality and artificial intelligence and all of these computational computer-based resources, we need more and more electricity to power these things. And so to need more electricity, but also try and stop producing carbon dioxide and, all these pollutants and emissions, it's kind of this weird intersect where it's like, well, how do we make more electricity without using the typical fuel that we use? And nuclear is kind of like the best option that meets in the middle. I mean, my personal opinion is, and most people in the nuclear industry, is that the answer isn't going to be just nuclear. It's going to be more than likely a mix of nuclear combined with wind and solar to perform what we call load following. So we can meet changing electricity demands throughout the day. There are ways to like store heat specifically. I was just at Idaho National Laboratories Modeling and Experimentation Validation School. Yeah, super long name. But while I was there, one of the things that we got to see and tour was this like experimental facility where INL is developing what they call thermal storage. So the ideal is to have this system where we have solar panels, wind turbines, and small modular nuclear reactors. So maybe during the day when it's super sunny out, or maybe it's pretty windy, we're getting tons of electricity from solar power. We don't necessarily need the nuclear power, but we can store the heat coming off of the nuclear reactor and then use that stored heat later on to produce electricity when the sun isn't shining. And that's kind of the beauty of these like combined systems that Idaho is working on developing. INL is working on developing these things now. And I totally just like went off track train of thought with that question. No. Yeah, that's kind of the general opinion, I guess, from the technical community and what I've seen from the non-technical community kind of coming together.
To touch back on that, where you need that sort of mix of different technology, I think not everyone has a firm grasp on what the different types of energy look like. Solar and wind are exciting, hydro is exciting, but they're not necessarily 100% reliable all the time because, the sun rises and sets. And as perfect as you can get the placement of solar panels, it's not going to be 100% all the time. Even the same thing with wind. So it feels like nuclear is more reliable. Am I right in that
Right.
assumption?
Yeah, so there's actually this thing we use to measure that. We call it capacity factor, and that's
Mhm.
basically fancy nerd terms for how much electricity we are producing, how much of the time. I said that terribly.
Good.
Backing up. So this thing called capacity factor, nerd terms for how frequently we are producing electricity at maximum capacity. Okay, so a nuclear power plant actually has the largest capacity factor out of all the energy sources, even fossil fuels, because a
Mhm.
nuclear reactor can run up to 92 to 93% of the time and be running at full capacity, producing all the electricity it possibly can safely. The crazier thing, I think, is if you look at solar power specifically, solar power can only produce up to 23% of a capacity factor. So it can only produce all of its electricity 23% of the time. And
Mhm.
wind, I believe, is somewhere in the 20 to 40% range. Don't quote me
Yeesh.
on that. I could have flip-flopped wind and solar, but they're in that like 20% range, which is
You're right.
crazy and clearly demonstrates that like we need something else to supplement this.
Absolutely. I actually had no idea about that capacity limit, so that's really good to know. Thank you for teaching me.
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
and so I have to ask because of all of the hype going around with it, but have you seen Oppenheimer?
Oh my gosh, no, I haven't seen it yet. I left for Idaho literally the day it came out
Oh my
and
God.
spent the entire time I was there in like 12 to 13 hours a day of lectures and seminars and just got back on Sunday. So I will see it. Hopefully
Okay.
this weekend we will see. But I do have an idea
Okay.
of what I think it's going to do to kind of the perception of nuclear. And we like
Mhm.
to err on the positive side. I am hopeful that the film is, for one, going to draw more people to the nuclear industry because we need it desperately. I mentioned the
Mhm.
workforce development issue. We need more people.
Yeah.
But number two, I'm hopeful is that knowing the history of Oppenheimer and his life and the things that he accomplished and his work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, I am very hopeful that this film will kind of bring attention to and shed light onto the
Mhm.
horror and dread that is nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And hopefully share that with people so that moving forward, people are more aware of how bad they actually are and
Mhm.
hopefully push towards a future where maybe there are no such thing as nuclear weapons. But that's a very optimistic viewpoint.
Totally. I like also saw it. So I'm not gonna spoil it. I think you'll enjoy it. I think they did a good job of separating different types of
Yeah.
applications of nuclear energy.
Cool. Cool.
But it's definitely something where, we have Oppenheimer, we have the TV show Chernobyl that are
Mhm.
impacting the public perception of nuclear energy and just the nuclear industry as a whole. So have you seen Chernobyl, the TV show?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so is there anything in that capacity that you would want to touch on as well to maybe alleviate some of the concern regarding nuclear energy that is being taken from that show?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the perspective you watch the show with, right? Being someone who's been working and studying in the nuclear industry for the last 5 years now, and I am very young for my career, but
Totally.
I will say I think the Chernobyl series really did, first off, it did a great job in kind of simplifying what happened into a way that is dramatized and entertaining, but is still digestible and not like overly technical. So I do applaud
Mhm.
HBO for that. And I think really though, talking about that perspective and kind of going back to that, when I watch the show, I think it demonstrates the concerns of Soviet Russia. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of like the workplace and the environment there. There are several scenes, I haven't seen it in a while, but I vaguely remember scenes of physicists from other countries calling to say, hey, what's going on? Like, we're
Mhm.
getting these readings, something's wrong. And the country kind of trying to cover it up. In the United States, we do not operate like that in the
Right.
slightest. And we have safety inspectors coming. We have safety inspectors that physically live at and sit at each nuclear power plant in the United States. Like, that is a real thing. So having those inspectors and having all those safety regulations and having a better safety culture is a really, really huge thing, right? You saw in the show, a lot of the power plant operators were like, I don't know if we should do this. This seems like a bad idea. And they got yelled at to keep pushing forward. In the US industry, if you don't think something's a good idea, everyone will drop everything and scram the reactor. They will shut down the reactor immediately and say, okay, what's wrong? Who had a thought? What? And so everybody just takes safety that much more seriously. And we have just a much healthier safety culture, I think.
That is super good to hear, because from your perspective and understanding with what happened at Chernobyl, was that an inspiration for a lot of the current safety regulations that the US and even like globally the nuclear industry has?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of an interesting history, and I've made a few TikToks about it, fun fact, but the 3 Mile Island accident in the US actually happened, I believe, before the Chernobyl incident. So 3 Mile Island was 1979. Chernobyl, I think, was 1986. So I think 3 Mile Island was the biggest kicker that we learned so much from. But even before these accidents, before 1979, which was the 3 Mile Island, the first big accident, every failure, every mistake that was made was documented and applied to the next design. And nuclear power plants were, even after 9/11, for example, all nuclear power plants in the US were retrofitted to be able to withstand a plane crash. So taking all of these, so taking all of these kinds of failures and everything and being able to take everything from it and apply it to what we have now is something we've been doing since before the accident, since like the beginning. You know, I mean, that is engineering. We learn through failure. We hope we fail in safe ways. And we work to make sure we do fail in safe ways so we can learn that way. Like, again, 3 Mile Island, failing in safe ways.
Right. So kind of going back to the public perception of nuclear, like when you think of nuclear, you immediately think of weapons, unfortunately. So how is what's in weapons different from what's used in power?
Yes, this is a great question. So nuclear weapons are, all of this is kind of based off of this thing we call enrichment, which the technical people will shoot me for saying this. I don't care, not my audience right now. It's basically, in super, super simple terms, a way to make whatever source you're using, whether it be uranium, right, for fuel. It's a way to make uranium more radioactive so that it will actually do nuclear fission. Okay, so if we kind of back it up for a second and look at uranium, the natural uranium that you can find in the ground, you can actually go outside and pick up a rock and it could be uranium depending on where you live. So that is uranium-238. That is the isotope that exists. If we go back to like high school chemistry, numbers of protons and neutrons, right? You have your mass number. And so uranium-238 is the isotope that is naturally occurring, very, very safe. And you could probably find outside. Uranium-235 is the fissile version or isotope of uranium. So that's the one that's going to be super radioactive and unstable. Now, the way we create fuel for nuclear energy is by taking this uranium-235 and kind of enriching it into uranium-238. So it goes through the soup to add a little bit of U-235 into the U-238. So typically, we call this low enriched uranium, is like 3%, give or take. So it's the littlest bit that we use in nuclear power reactors, in what they call high assay low enriched uranium, or HALEU. HALEU, if you see that or hear that in the news, HELEU, all that's talking about is the amount of U-235 spicy version of uranium that is in the uranium. Okay, so I believe HALEU is like 3 to 5%. Don't quote me on that, but it all is just based on the amount of spicy uranium in the regular uranium. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, great analogy. It's like when a restaurant and they're like, okay, how spicy do you want? Like, do you want mild? Do you want medium? Or do you want spicy? Right. The fuel we use in nuclear reactors is mild, not spicy. It is made for people like me who cannot ingest spice. Right. But then if we look at nuclear weapons, to create a nuclear weapon, you need high enriched, super, super, super spicy or plutonium, right? And to get that spicy of uranium, you need special equipment and a lot of enrichment processes. So that's kind of the big difference, that you don't have that massive amount of super spicy material in one tiny location. So that's what makes nuclear energy weapons so different, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, that the analogy of the salsa is actually exactly what I needed. That makes infinite amounts of sense. So thank you.
To kind of like cross our T's and dot our I's there, that's the main difference. Creating a nuclear weapon is actually very difficult to do because it's very difficult to acquire that much super spicy uranium. And that's kind of where we drain.
Right. And so like with that, the differentiation between weapons and energy, then I think a lot of people have concerns regarding the waste aspect of it. I saw that you had a TikTok where you showed what the nuclear waste actually looks like. And I think the common misconception, like you said earlier with like Homer Simpson, you have these giant vats of like green goo. That's what people think nuclear energy waste is. What actually is it? And have we figured out what to do with it?
Okay. Yeah. So first thing, nuclear, like there is no glowing green. Things actually glow blue. Fun fact.
Interesting.
But not the waste. It's something we call Cherenkov radiation, and it's something that happens in fast reactors when you kind of pulse the reactor. Neutrons start to dance, things start to glow blue. This really pretty like color. It's actually really cool. But it's not green. So making that point first. Now diving into the waste. So first off, the waste does not glow at all. It is not colored. We're just looking at metal rods. We have long, skinny metal rods. Inside these metal rods are little tiny ceramic pellets that are about the size of a gummy bear that are stacked up inside the metal rods. And those metal rods containing the gummy-sized pellets are your nuclear fuel that becomes your nuclear waste, right? So not green glowing goo. I don't know where that came from. Sometimes we do have the 55-gallon drums, the big buckets, but that's typically for waste like gloves from handling something in a lab. Like that is all very research-based applications, never filled with green glowing goo, and not really a concern in the commercial nuclear power industry, you know? So totally a huge misconception. And then the thing is, what do we do with it, right? Because obviously, even though they're just metal rods, we have to like put it somewhere. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to touch it if it's that radioactive, right? So what happens right now in the US, we take our fuel and we put them in these giant swimming pools, except not for swimming. Don't swim in them. Technically, you could swim in them and you would be fine because water is actually a really good radiation shield. So as long as you don't like deep dive, you'll be okay. Wouldn't recommend though. So we put these rods into these giant pools to let them cool down, make them chill out, get all the neutrons to calm down. And they sit there for typically like 2 years or something like that. And then they get, which each fuel rod lasts about like 2 to 3 years, I believe, in the nuclear reactor. So that's pretty on par, like with the life cycle, as one batch of fuel is leaving the pool, another batch is coming into the pool kind of thing. And we take these rods and then we put them into these giant dry casks They look kind of like farm silos a little bit, not as
Okay.
big, but like they're basically just these giant concrete cylinders. And they are incredibly strong, virtually indestructible. There are some crazy videos on YouTube of like trucks crashing into them and planes crashing into them and people like trying to break into them. So they're very, very strong, very, very safe. They shield all the radiation that is left over coming off of these fuel rods after they've been in the pool. The little bit that's left, they shield perfectly well. You can go up and actually like hug these things and be totally fine. People have before. So with all of that, we could, instead of having our fuel just sit in these like giant silo looking things for eternity, one of the things we could be doing is actually recycling the fuel. They call it reprocessing. So what a lot of people don't know is if you take this fuel and put it back into what's called a breeder reactor, which uses neutrons to smack into the fuel rod, you can turn the fuel into what they call transmute the fuel or change it into plutonium and use that as more nuclear fuel. Kind of a crazy, cool thing we can be doing. They call it closing the fuel cycle.
Yeah.
The only reason we don't do that in the United States is because it's cheaper to just mine for more uranium or import uranium from Russia.
Of course.
That's, yeah, it's so crazy. And the other thing is we are working on building a deep geological repository for long-term storage. So that's like a lot of fancy words to say we're going to dig a hole really, really far underground and make sure it's super strong and super tough. And we're going to put the nuclear waste there, back in the ground, back where it came from.
Is there, I guess, like two questions coming off of that. With one, is there any sort of concern of like ever running out of uranium?
No, not
Okay.
in our lifetime or in our ancestors' lifetime.
Okay, that's good.
So one of the craziest things about nuclear energy is what they call power density. So nuclear can produce way, way more electricity for way, way less fuel. So I think it's something, actually, I'm gonna cheat and look it up, the statistics, so I don't get it wrong. Nuclear fuel to coal. So if you compare it to coal or natural gas, one fuel pellet, one uranium fuel pellet, the size of a gummy bear, can make as much energy or as much electricity as over a ton of coal, or 150 gallons of oil, or 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas. Just for one uranium pellet. So nobody's really concerned about it running out.
Oh, okay, yeah. That is damn, that is crazy, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
So like then those rods, how many pellets are in a rod?
That's a
Like
good
on
question.
average.
Probably about, so the rods are like typically really tall. It depends on the reactor design, but typically they're like a few meters tall kind of thing. So I would say maybe a couple hundred pellets per rod.
That visualization of how much energy that one little gummy bear pellet can produce times however many, that's a crazy visual. Now that I understand how much energy is produced out of that, that's exciting.
It's mind-blowing.
That is mind-blowing. I like don't even know what to say because I'm just like, damn, that's crazy. And then I guess second question from that is when it comes to digging that hole or finding the location for where we're just funneling the waste back into the ground where it came from, is there any sort of process to figuring out exactly where that's going to be? Because I know Yucca Mountain was a place that was going to happen, but like what happened with that?
Oh, so Yucca Mountain is a messy demonstration of what happens to science and engineering when politics get involved. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, really just what happened there. So if we go back in time, the Atomic Energy Commission, and I'm not going to try and say dates because I'm going to screw them up, but like before there was the Department of Energy, right, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I believe like 1960s, 50s time frame was the Atomic Energy Commission, and it was kind of the two of them combined into one. And way back then, the Atomic Energy Commission did a ton of research to figure out where we're going to put the used nuclear fuel, is what we're calling it now, to kind of get away from the stigma behind waste, green glowing slime. So basically, the Atomic Energy Commission said, okay, we did a bunch of research. The best place to put this fuel is in a salt mine, like a salt bed underground. There are these crazy cool, like underground cave type things with tons of salt. It's perfect. So the scientists, the engineers figured it out. They found a salt mine in Kentucky. They bought it. Everybody in Kentucky was like totally on board. They were like, yes, this is going to be good for our economy. Nuclear is the future. We've got this. And then some geologists from the area found out that that particular salt mine was not great because it had some groundwater running through it. It was a little leaky. It was just like not a good area. The Atomic Energy Commission should have checked that before they bought the land, but they did not. And so basically these geologists said, pick any salt mine, just not this salt mine. So the Atomic Energy Commission is like, okay, fine, whatever. We'll pick somewhere else, I guess. And their ego's like a little bit bruised, you know. And so the Atomic Energy Commission, and I guess at some point around here, it splits into DOE, the Department of Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But essentially, the Department of Energy says, okay, well, we need help figuring this out, and Congress gets involved, and there's a whole bunch of debate, especially after the Kentucky situation. And it takes 10 years to figure out what they're going to do. 10 years. And by the end of this 10 years, Congress says, okay, we're putting our foot down. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to pick 3 locations. You, DOE, are going to pick 3 potential sites for this nuclear waste facility. And we're going to pick the one site out of those 3. And they also implemented this idea that basically not one individual site can be the only site. So they weren't going to build one nuclear waste site that could hold all the nuclear waste, because they wanted to kind of share the burden among other states of being the nuclear waste dumping ground. And you can see kind of the interesting shift in narrative going from Kentucky being all gung-ho and excited at the kind of height of the nuclear energy sort of renaissance, excitement, and drive, modernization, to now we're getting into the 70s, the 80s, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, all these threats of nuclear weapons, and people just being scared, right? So that's kind of the narrative that's going on. And so the Department of Energy comes back and says, well, we have 3 sites, and those 3 sites are already on Department of Energy land. So I think that sounds good. I think we're going to pick these 3 sites. They're already characterized. Keep in mind, none of them were salt mines. There was, actually, I think one of them was, but the other 2 was a basalt rock site. And then Yucca Mountain was lithified volcanic ash. Okay. No research for basalt or basalt rock or lithified volcanic ash for storing nuclear waste. So kind of funny, kind of weird. So then DOE serves up these different sites on a platter, and the Congress, the government, says, okay, well, we're going to hash this out. And the most powerful congressional representative at the time was in, I believe, Texas, which was one of the sites, and the other most powerful of the 3 was in Washington. So then the third, the least powerful of all three, was the congressional representative of the Nevada Yucca Mountain site. That is how Yucca Mountain was selected.
What?
Yeah. And fast forward, they find out that turns out lithified volcanic ash is actually terrible for storing nuclear fuel. Not to mention the fact that like it really pissed off a lot of Native American tribes because it is on sacred Native American land. Also not good. So moving forward and to kind of address these concerns, what the Department of Energy is doing now, and I'm so sorry if I've been talking way too long about this.
No, but, this is so interesting. I love it.
Good. So the Department of Energy, what they're doing now to prevent this from happening again is implementing something they call consent-based siting. So they've actually hired human factors psychologists and sociologists to study which communities would benefit the most from a nuclear used fuel storage site and to understand how it will affect the people in the area, which is actually like a huge step. Props to them for finally getting there, and props to the Secretary of Nuclear Energy. I don't think she's a deputy. I think she's the full Secretary of Nuclear Energy, Katie Huff. She's actually a nuclear engineering professor at the University of Illinois.
Oh, no way.
And now
so
she's
cool.
in Department of Energy. Yeah.
Go her. That's awesome.
Yeah. Another woman in STEM making strides.
I know. We're at like what, 4 at this point?
Yeah.
Which I'll take it.
Yeah, let's keep it going.
One, I did not know that those individuals were involved in the determination of where used nuclear material storage facility is going to go. And that kind of leads me to another question of who gets involved in nuclear energy? You know, are there certain groups of people, certain like types of people? And from your experience, are there any groups of individuals that you wish had a seat at the table or were more vocal in the decision-making process when it comes to nuclear energy?
Oh, I think that's kind of been one. I wish there were more nuclear engineers in politics that were involved in this. And that, I mean, we'll see what happens. Maybe one day it'll be me. But I really think I really genuinely believe we need more engineers specifically and more technical people that have a seat at the table in making these massive decisions. Because how can somebody reasonably be writing laws, making these huge decisions about our energy infrastructure and sustainability and climate change? These are all massive decisions. And with no technical understanding, how can you trust that you are making an informed decision? That's to me, it just doesn't really make sense. Although there are technical advisors and things like that, I wish there were more engineers in politics. We engineers are literally trained to solve problems. Like they teach us math, but like really what they're secretly training us to do is like fix problems and solve problems. So to see more representation of that in Congress and in the government would be incredible.
I totally agree. I think there's just like pretty much in every sector of sustainability outside of just nuclear as well, there are a lot of people that in positions of power that don't care or don't know anything, and they're making those decisions. So how can they adequately make a decision without knowing or without caring? And like you can have technical advisors, but an advisor is an advisor. It's not necessarily the person making the decision, and the person making the decision can ignore their advisor. So I totally agree. There's a lot of area of opportunity for us to have people who are better informed. And then in general, when it comes to nuclear energy as a whole, what's holding us back? This has been an uphill battle, it feels like, for nuclear energy to be more of a like solidified part of our lives as Americans. And then in a global context, what is holding nuclear energy back? Is it the public perception? Is it funding? What is it? If you know, because that's a big question.
Yes, it is a big question. And I think it's a question that a lot of our industry leaders are still answer. I think one of the biggest problems, I've touched on it a few times before, is workforce development. We don't have enough people working in the industry. There are more jobs than there are people applying, which is kind of scary in this economy, right? To see more jobs than people applying. So I think that's definitely a contributing factor. I think the public perception has gotten a lot better. I think that is on the rise, and people are getting better and more educated and more open to understanding this, especially because we are physically seeing the implications of climate change here and now.
Yeah.
So I think that is on the way up. But I think one of the biggest problems we're facing right now with deploying advanced reactor technology that could really change the game completely is looking at our regulations. So because our regulations are so incredibly strict, probably too strict, it's very, very difficult to implement regulations for a new reactor type when they're written for very specific systems, right? So in and completely change the system, make everything 10 times safer. Then why do you need all of these backup safety things if it's already safe? Like, it sense. Right. So kind of like if I walk up and I say, okay, my phone is blue, right? And you say, yes, your phone is blue, except I don't fully believe you. So we're gonna double check that, and we're gonna put a blue case on it and make sure it's still blue, even though it's already blue. That just doesn't make sense, right? We're like, okay, yes, it is still blue. It did not change. So those kinds of things, applying that to the nuclear industry, really, really, it is, in my opinion, those regulations that are holding us back, because the reactors are getting safer, they're getting smaller, they don't need a crazy 5 to 10 year long licensing process to slow things down. We need to be pumping these out. So we need more people working for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and more people working on licensing new reactors, so reactors can get their licenses and get out the door. And so I think that, plus the economics, which again, we're addressing with the small modular reactors, those are kind of the big things that are holding us back.
And like, when it comes to changing regulation, that's going to be the government. Like, they need to make those changes, correct? So
has to come from Congress.
Even more reason to have more engineers in the political system.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. And I think I do want to ask one more question, just to like really all tie it back to sustainability and touch on something that you said at the very beginning. Do you believe that nuclear energy will truly impact the UN's sustainability development goals, their green energy goals? Nuclear can be the answer for them.
I wholeheartedly, 100%, I believe that nuclear is going to be, if not the solution, a part of the solution. That being said, yes, I am a nuclear engineer. Maybe that does make me biased, but at the end of the day, I care about climate change and I care about the planet. And I acknowledge and am fully accepting of the fact that if nuclear is not the answer and we find something better, then something better is the answer. I mean, if we figure out some crazy new alien technology that will fix our energy problem, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to go learn how to do that and get into that field, right? But I have yet to see anything that is as reliable, as not weather dependent, and as powerful as nuclear energy.
Right. That's super, super exciting. And I feel like you've really demonstrated how it is so effective. I think my only follow-up question to that is, do we think that nuclear energy can be implemented quickly enough for it to be something that is going to impact the state of climate change as is? Is this something that we can turn on and immediately we see change? Or is this something where we're going to have to wait 50 years in the future to really see any notable change?
I think with nuclear fission and the advanced reactors, the small modular reactors, we're going to see that like very, very soon. I'm confident within the next 5 years, we're going to see these reactors start to be constructed, and we're going to start to see less carbon dioxide emissions, more clean energy, and we're going to see the impact of that very soon. The other thing that I'll throw out there that a lot of people don't know is nuclear energy also can be used to produce quite a large amount of hydrogen, which is a key ingredient in synthetic fuels that can be used to replace gasoline to power cars with lower carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, I think nuclear is going to be used for not only clean energy, but also for hydrogen production, for more clean energy for cars, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is going to be the most direct change we're going to see earlier on. When we're talking about nuclear fusion, I do think there are a lot of efforts. I mean, I work on fusion. It's an incredible industry. I don't think we're going to see that fully commercialized for probably at least another 20 to 30 years. I think we'll have some test reactors and some cool experiments and stuff going on, but until we get to the point where we are actually making more energy than we are putting into the system, I don't foresee that. But I'll reiterate, to end on a lighter note, as I said before, I think nuclear fission and advanced reactor technology is what's going to be the leader in clean energy production and mitigating climate change in the future.
That's so exciting. It's always nice to hear sustainability and our future phrased in a more optimistic
right?
lights, because it always feels so doom and gloom. So that's really exciting. And I really appreciate your expertise and your takes on all of this. And I know that we have a guest question really quickly from Tim. Like I mentioned earlier, he's actually the one that introduced me to your TikTok channel, and
awesome.
Big nuclear energy nerd. So gonna give him the floor for a second. Tim, you want to join? One sec.
Come on, Tim.
Hello, how's it going?
Hey, Tim, what's up?
Sweet, yeah, big fan of your TikTok channel, all the stuff you're doing. Quick intro.
My God.
Just
Thank
for
you so much.
Of course. Kind of what I've been exposed to previously in nuclear energy, just so you're on the same page. Back in was it the summer of 2017, I worked out at the ATR at INL, and then in the summer,
my gosh,
yeah, just as an intern, and then in 2018 as an intern, I was at BWXT right as they were kind of ramping up on their Technetium 99 metastable and their all the stuff going on with the Draco engine now for NASA. So
Project Alpha.
Yeah. So a lot of big stuff going on there. But I got kind of two questions, one serious and the one fun one for you. We've been working on nuclear energy for a while, and we've done a lot of science. I mean, there's been like, I think it's 52 reactors we've built out at INL. And so we figured out a lot of stuff, but we haven't built a lot of different designs that have been out there, like commercially producing energy. And kind of my question is there a change of heart or a pull as you're going to be like, as you're going through school and potentially going into the workforce, so like, does it make sense to try to go onto the engineering and science side to keep designing new things? Or is there part of you that wants to be like, well, if I really want to get all this technology actually used, to go into the policy side or the government side, the lobbying side or whatever? Like, is there a split there, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, oh gosh, so I am very split between the two, and I think about all the time considering a career in politics and in government after I finish grad school, maybe work in the technical industry for a little bit, I don't know, a few years, maybe 5-10 years. But I do long-term think I beyond that want to go into politics, just because I've developed such a platform and, worked on my public communication skills so much over the years. I feel like it would be a shame for that to go to waste and not be put to use. Yeah. Right. And you're so right. We were actually talking about it earlier. the kind of intersect between engineers and policymakers is non-existent right now, and it's so desperately needed. And the amount of times that I have seen things, the first project I ever worked on, I was interning at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and I was working on designs for the versatile test reactor project, which its budget got zero, its allocations got zeroed out in 2021, 2022, something like that. And that was like the first project I ever worked on. It broke my heart. But these things happen all the time. We pour all this money into so many different projects, and it just goes to waste because we pull the rug out from under the programs. So like, why are we doing this? It makes no sense to me. And that's one of the things that pushes me to want to go in that direction. Also, I interned at BWXT last summer. So cool, small world.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that'd be really exciting to have you on the side of nuclear energy, getting all the things working. And then fun question for you, and I'll exclude any of the reactors that are currently in design so you don't make any friends or enemies. Do you have a favorite reactor design? Because we got a lot of vertically loaded ones. I know Canada has some horizontally loaded ones. My personal favorite is the cloverleaf. So do you have a favorite reactor?
Yeah. My favorite reactor is the Natrium design.
Okay.
The sodium cool, or is it a sodium cooled fast reactor? I believe so. But it is I believe it's TerraPower's Natrium design. So I made a video about this, and you have to forgive me because it is 7 p.m. I've been in the lab way too long today, and my brain is mush. But it is like, yeah, it is TerraPower's Natrium reactor. So it's includes this kind of integrated energy storage and kind of heat storage, kind of like the INL stuff that I was talking about earlier. I was just out at INL for modeling, experimentation, and validation school, and the one of the things we looked at were some experiments that people had running for thermal storage, right? And I think that is like one of the most brilliant things we could be doing, is taking the excess process heat and storing it to use for more energy production later. It is just brilliant. TerraPower is incorporating into the Natrium design, and I just think it's like the best.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's nice to see nuclear doing the same thing that like combined cycle natural gas plants have been doing for a while. It just makes sense. All right, that was the questions for me. Thanks.
Awesome. It was great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well.
Yay. So glad you guys were able to quickly chat. But yeah, that was really it. And thank you so much for spending all this time with us. Super, super appreciate it again. I've learned so much, and I'm so positive that everyone that listens to this is going to come out of this with a brand new perspective on nuclear energy. All of your details will also be in the description box below. So for everybody, if you haven't heard of Kaylee before, go check her out on TikTok, Miss Nuclear Energy. Also, Cunningham.a.k.a. is your alias, I think.
Yes.
So check her out. You're doing a lot of really cool stuff. Really appreciate you. And thank you for being such an inspiration to many high school students and many people that aren't in high school, myself included. So yeah, thanks so much. And can't wait to see what you do in the future. Thanks for everything.
Thank you so much for having me. It's cool to be here and chit-chatting, and best of luck. I'm excited to be the first episode.
And that concludes this week's episode. Again, a huge shout out to Kaylee for taking the time to hop on Zoom to have an almost 2-hour discussion with me and Tim. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you all have a better understanding of what nuclear energy is and what role it can play in a more sustainable future. If you feel so inclined or passionate about what you heard today, easy ways to make small changes in your daily life include diversifying your energy consumption portfolio. Oftentimes, energy companies will allow you to choose where your energy is sourced from, or at the very least, they can provide you with the makeup of your energy portfolio. Like Kylee said, we also desperately need more people on the side of nuclear. So if you are interested in pursuing a career in that space, reach out to Kaylee or your school's counselors to see what educational options might be right for you. And of course, we can always write to your elected representatives to voice your opinions and urge them to be on the side of nuclear as well. If you have any questions, thoughts, or alternative ways to get involved in the nuclear energy community, please reach out via urbantumbleweedpod@gmail.com or at Urban Tumbleweed Podcast on Instagram. And of course, give Kaylee a follow on TikTok at Cunningham.Kaylee to learn even more about nuclear. She's such a great follow. I learned so much pretty much every day because of her, and I'm confident that if you follow her, you will as well. But until then, stay rad. I'll see y'all soon.